Hello, welcome. Ooh, wow, that is a cool avatar. Hello, welcome. Oh, look at Reginaldo's here. You're scheduled for later this afternoon. How good of you to come to the first session, get like a sense of how this all goes, and then also, then maybe people will come to your session later today. Very smart, very good.
Support. It's all support, right?
Yeah, it's good. Hello, welcome. So glad that everyone who is here. We have like the perfect Brady Bunch square going right now. Not that I'm opposed if like any other people come and mess up our perfect square, but it is well set up right now. I This is the part of the show where I just riff for a moment, trying to just like stretch out time a bit so that a few more people might trickle in, including one of our speakers. But mostly, just very glad that you all are here with us virtually on a hello. Very glad that you all are here with us on a Friday morning. Is that what it is? I have no idea what day it is anymore, ever. This is a okay. I'm gonna just tell hello. I'm gonna just tell a true story very quickly, and then I promise we're gonna start. Which is, I have another job where I had to start sending out information about an event that I'm doing, and I sent it all out saying, "Oh, it was gonna start at like noon Central Standard Time." And then I started getting all these people messaging me being like, well, technically it's noon daylight, central daylight time, not standard time. And I like was like, oh no, did I mess this up? And I went and looked. There is no difference this time of the year in Minnesota between Central Standard Time and Central Daylight Time. And time is an illusion anyway. Haven't we learned anything over the course of the pandemic? Like nothing, time doesn't matter. Anyway,
And it's
welcome. It
it's
is now
Blur's Day. And
10:32 Central Daylight Time in Minnesota. Sorry, Reggie, were you going to say something?
I was saying it's Blur's Day every day.
Thursday every day. Uh, it's good. So I am so grateful for you all being here. My name is Tane Danger. If you watched, which I hope you all did, our fabulous Design in 7 videos that we posted early this week, that we debuted early this week, you hopefully saw me introing our 7 wonderful speakers. Typically, I don't know if folks know, everybody who's here knows this. Design in 7 is something that's been going on for more than a decade now. And historically, it's always been that we pack a big auditorium filled with people. There's this excitement over, like, oh, they got to get done in 7 minutes so we can bring the next person in. This was the first year, for obvious reasons, that we decided to do it virtually, which obviously is different, but I think is actually very cool and exciting because we know that we've had folks who were able to watch and see these incredible talks who might not have ever been able to make it down to the University of Minnesota campus to see it live. So that piece is very cool. And then this that we are doing today is also brand new, something that we have never done before, and I am very happy about. We are actually going to take some time to talk with our speakers from the 7 presentations, ask them some follow-up questions, ask them to elaborate a bit on what maybe they couldn't squeeze into 7 minutes, and then generally to just sort of get to pick the brains of 7 really smart, interesting people about design, how design has influenced their careers and their lives, and how they apply it. So, I am very happy. We have, well, technically we have 3 panelists today, although one of our panelists for our afternoon session is here, and so who knows if he's going to jump into the conversation or not. It could be a surprise cameo. I want to start by turning over like the stage briefly to each of our panelists who are here this morning to just introduce themselves, maybe share just a little bit about who they are, where they spend the majority of their non-home time, their work, which is the same as work time now. Anyway, where they work and professionally, and also just maybe generally sort of how they're doing today, and where we're at. So I'll just say quickly one more time, I'm Tane Danger. I'm here in part because I am an adjunct faculty at the School of Design. I teach a class called Improvisation in Design. And then I've had the great honor of getting to MC this event for a couple of years now. And so I'm very excited to be here. Deb, you are unmuted, and I'm going to take that as an invitation to let you introduce yourself first.
Thank you, Tane. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Barnes. I am a vice president and a part owner of Henriksen, which is a commercial furniture dealership, and I am an interior designer, and my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you so much, Deb. Maura, I'm going to turn it over to you next, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Hi, everybody. I'm Maura Rockcastle. I'm a landscape architect, principal and co-founder of 10 by 10. We do mostly landscape architecture, but we tend to be pretty flexible with our disciplinary boundaries. So we do some public art, we do interpretation and experience design, and work a lot with the architects in town, as well as kind of other types of collaborators, cultural landscape architects, artists. And our work is really focused on a different way of working. So process is one of the things I didn't talk too much in the presentation about, how we think about and approach design as a process and how that relates to this sort of approach of unlearning and awareness and being open. We're a group of 12, 13 now designers in our office. So I'm really excited to be here and share this space with all of you and to answer any questions you have.
Fabulous. All right. Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, definitely has the best bookcase of anybody in the setup right now. Emily, if you are willing to unmute and just give us a short intro of yourself.
And definitely has dilated eyes. So I apologize for any of this that's happening. Wasn't intentional to schedule these things next to one another. And also, speaking of shared space, my wife is sharing it upstairs and is on a call as well. So apologies if it gets a little loud over here. Hey everyone, I'm Emily Turner. I'm with a local organization called All Square. We exist to invest in leaders in the Twin Cities who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. So we do that mostly through a fellowship in a grilled cheese restaurant that we have. And also we're working on opening a law firm for 2022. So my pronouns are she, her, and I'm really, really happy to be here with all of you today.
Very cool. Okay, so this is fabulous. These are our three panelists for now. We are going to do another session at 12:30 with our other four panelists. So hopefully you all come back for that. I just want to say I really hope that the majority of this time will be for you all here in the audience to get to ask questions. If you have a question, I think the easiest way for us to do this is you could either just put it entirely in the chat, or if you want, you could just put in the chat, oh, I have a question I would like to ask, and then we'll turn it over to you to unmute and turn on your camera, hopefully, and just ask the question. Whatever you're more comfortable with. But let me start with this, because you set this up very nicely, Maura, which is you talked about the process and how you do this. I am always fascinated by what do you do every day? Like, what does your day look like? What is your job? Because we got to see sort of like all of you talk in some ways about what it looks like at the end, like the final products and things like that. But I am curious just sort of what that process, as you said, sort of looks like on a day-to-day basis. What do you do each day? And since you kind of set us up for that, Maura, maybe you will start.
Sure, it's a great question, and it's an overwhelming question. I think 10 by 10 is also 6 years old. April is our kind of 6th year birthday month. So we're somewhere in between this blurry space of a startup, but not quite a startup, have access to some of these incredible dream jobs that we set out to be able to pursue and to be able to work on and collaborate on. So my day-to-day, what I do every day is a complete cacophony of all sorts of things, from administration, finances, it's sustaining a business that is kind of growing, just trying to maintain that growth, position ourselves to get more of the kinds of projects that we want to work on, both here locally and a little further afield in the Midwest and elsewhere. And I am not so much managing projects as much. Most of my incredible team is doing a lot of that work, but kind of helping to support them and mentor them. I really like designing, so I'm also trying to make space on those project teams to be able to do a bit of drawing still as much as I can. And then of course, marketing and watering the plants. This is my office space behind me. I'm usually not here. We're all still remote largely. But for a quieter space and a well-lit space, this is where I come. And Fridays I water the plants. So that's a little glimpse.
Yeah. No, that's fabulous. I mean, Emily, you also are kind of Jill of all trades, like with All Square, I imagine. So is that a similar picture? How do you think about your days, sort of?
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. It all definitely, it's very fluid. And I'm trying to get a little more intentional about being in the roles where the org needs me instead of the roles where I feel best at, which is very hard, admittedly. But for the first, I guess, a year, my days were pretty focused on just the physical restaurant. Significantly underrated how difficult it was to the art of running a restaurant, the business end of it, all of the pragmatics. So yeah, I was very uncomfortable in that space, trying to be as big of an asset as I could be in the culinary space. But now I'm actually really fortunate in this moment in that I feel really grateful to be tapping into some of my architectural background. And one, we're looking to acquire the building and thinking through what we want to do with it, and also hoping to find another space for this law firm that we're opening. So I think between creating decks and trying to pitch the vision and why we want to do this, and really trying to activate the legal community, grant writing, constantly, I'd say trying to find funds right now is 80% of my work. But most importantly, getting to stop into the restaurant and work one-on-one with fellows, and plug in the ways that my team wants me to, instead of, dipping into their lane. So I do my best to try to navigate those boundaries and be where I'm needed, not where I want to be. So right now I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. It feels like a really good space to be in, kind of blending the legal and architecture, where I feel just a tiny bit more competent than I did in, HR and running a kitchen. And yeah, it was interesting. Being a janitor, whatever, it was fascinating.
I'm going to throw it over to Deb in just a sec. I just got to say, I really appreciate both of these answers, because I will say in my class, we spend a lot of time on how we actually interact with each other as a team. How do we work together well to design something, to brainstorm, to create something. And a lot of times students are like, oh, why are we spending so much time on like this interpersonal communication stuff or team building stuff? I'm like, because that's like 80% of life is, especially I think in design, is trying to navigate that stuff. And sometimes I worry that it gets sort of pushed aside as like, oh, that's a soft thing. Like we're not, we need to focus on the hard things of like how to design and draw and those kinds of things. And yet how we actually like manage a team and work together is so important. And having those skills is just wildly central to almost anything you're going to do. But that's just me chiming in. Deb, how do you spend your days?
Well, it's interesting because I've been in my role just over 2 years. And so pretty much 50% of my time at Henriksen has been in quarantine, or during the pandemic. So it changed dramatically during that time. And I loved, Tane, your comment about Emily and Jill of all trades, because I think that all of us are in, leadership roles in our respective organizations. And you do have to, even though your education is in one sort of very narrow path, we've all sort of branched out and had to do all these other things in our roles. And, in this past year, I found a lot of my time spent on marketing and digital media and things that I wouldn't have expected to have to be involved in, but we really had to up our game because a lot of our connection and our outreach was now done virtually. So that's been a really interesting kind of shift in where I focused my time, because in the past it was a lot of outreach and events and activities. And I think in your introduction to me, I've always been really involved in professional organizations and connecting with people and volunteering my time. And so that has all kind of shifted as far as how much physical time we can spend together in those volunteer activities. So, but yeah, it's every day is different, and I am, got my vaccine, so hopefully I'm going to start being able to get out and meet with people again and start talking to people more face to face.
That's very cool. Congratulations. So I have a million more questions, and I see that we have a question in the chat. So Philip, you say you've got a question for Emily. Do you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Tane. So I'm Philip Koski. I'm an architect, and I'm also on the Student Alumni Board. So thank you, Emily, for participating this year. I'm glad you stuck with it. We asked you like 2 years ago. So glad to actually finally see your presentation. I wanted to ask you, since you have a background in architecture, about your design thinking. I think the All Square, the restaurant concept is amazing and everything else that it's doing. But architecture and design being an iterative process, I'm sure there were other ideas that you thought of that you did not proceed with, right? So for every good idea, there's maybe a dozen or two bad ideas. So two-part question maybe, what were some of the bad ideas or ideas that you left on the floor, crumpled up in a little piece of paper in the wastebasket, and why grilled cheese?
Yeah, great question. Plenty of bad idea. Can you hear me? I really can't see. Okay, fantastic. I think I turned my video off. My eyes are really, really something right now. But I would say a few things. All Square was a pretty impulsive move. And so the idea kind of came when wife said she would support, and it kind of happened. So the idea didn't go through that many iterations, as far as we knew it was going to be a restaurant. We knew there's going to be a programming piece of it, sort of professional development. And then this law firm kind of really came as a response to what happened with George Floyd. But what I will say is, as far as the design, one, I think our branding and our logo, I very much brought my interest to the table on that. And as far as now looking back, one, I will say the worst iteration of the All Square branding and logo was the one that I created. So happy to share that out, and that, we call it retro, but we definitely had a whole different kind of vibe going on. And I bring, I really like kind of earthy aesthetic, clean lines, and I have a very sort of particular palette. And so what's been the hardest for me, but I'm so thankful that I'm doing it and still having to challenge myself to do it, is to open up what this thing, I mean, admittedly, I do have quite a bit of say in like what we actually go with, but is to forfeit that, like what I want this to look like, and to bring in community. So we had the Brand Lab. I don't know if any of you have heard of them, but they work with predominantly college students of color. And Whittier, an agency that I ultimately teamed with to create the branding when I realized mine just wasn't that great, agreed to bring in Brand Lab as well. So ultimately they came to the table with, like, have community members and family that's been impacted by this. I don't think either one of them had been impacted by the system, but very proximate to it. And so they brought this wild neon palette. Like, it was punchy, bold, unapologetic, completely out of my comfort zone. Neon colors, like bright colors, are not my jam. But honestly, letting it kind of take knowing too that ultimately someday I'll hand All Square off. Like it from the beginning, trying to challenge myself to just let it take on a life that it needed to take on, based on people who had a vested interest in it. I will not say that it was easy, but once I did let go and that branding came in, and then ultimately that played out in the architecture with the architects that designed it, they were the same way at first. They were like, neon? We don't do neon. Like, that's not, we do black, white, gray. And I'm like, listen, it's got to come in. So they brought it in through really cool neon lighting. And so all that to say that that said, grilled cheese was, I'll just keep it short. I had learned about grilled cheese restaurants when I was considering leaving my job to work on something on the East Coast and West Coast that were popping up, just straight up grilled cheese. And I was like, that sounds amazing. I don't cook. I can kind of cook grilled cheese. Wouldn't it be cool to design a grilled cheese restaurant? And so the frustration with criminal justice and all that I was envisioning kind of paired with that grilled cheese unexpectedly, and then it just took off. So I'm talking too much, but thank you so much for the question. I really appreciate it very much.
That was fabulous. And I will just say quickly, we've had a batch of folks join us, so thank you all so much for being here. I'm Tane Danger, and we are doing a Q&A session right now with 3 of our presenters from Design in 7. So we've got Deb Barnes, Emily Turner, and Maura Rockcastle, and we are opening it up for your questions. If you have got a question, please post it in the chat, as somebody just did. And if you want to actually ask your question, that is very cool too, and just let us know that. And do you want to ask this question, or do you just want me to do this? I am very worried I'm going to mispronounce your name. I apologize in advance.
She goes by Abby, so.
Okay, Abby. Okay, great.
Right.
Well, Abby has this question for Deb. Hey, it's great to see you. And then,
You too.
thanks for sharing your amazing experience. What suggestions do you have specifically for academia to prepare interior design and design students who can pivot quickly and be adaptable once they graduate, particularly as you all have mentioned, that is what the world needs now?
And great, thank you for that question, and good to see you too. I served on the interior design board at the U of M with Abby, and it was a great experience. And I hope someday we get to see each other live again. You know, I'm glad you asked that question because, you know, interior designers, we come out of with our education and we're raring to go. And sometimes we're, you know, put into a box of what we are expected to do. And one of the things that I tried to do through my presentation is show that, you know, there's so many opportunities for interior designers coming out of the profession to explore careers. And I want people to sort of think about casting their net wide on what opportunities are out there. But I do think that training people about the business side of design, because I know that, you know, some of us have a nonprofit arm, and I think that's great, but we are a for-profit entities. You know, we have to figure out how to make money with our craft, with our passions. And so understanding that coming out of design, it's really important to follow your passions, but it's also a business. And to be understand, you know, like Emily, and I think Maura, you said too, I mean, some of the things that you're doing, you probably, when you came out of school, you never thought you were going to be doing those things, payroll or, you know, marketing or HR or, you know, creating strategy for the organization. But what I believe is creative professionals really bring something unique to the table. And that's one of the things that, you know, I work with, my leadership team that I work with all come from the furniture side. None of them come from the design side. So I feel like it's important to push that creative narrative in, you know, having a different point of view come to the table, not only from a woman, but also from an interior design or a creative perspective. I'll admit through my presentation, you know, again, that I didn't take the path of a creative, but I still, you know, I exude creativity. So as a student coming out, I'd never want somebody to lose that creative side, because likely that's why you went into the profession to begin with. But again, broadening your perspective, and as academics, making sure that people understand and have exposure to the business side of design.
Maura, maybe do you have anything in that world?
I would love to just build on that a little bit, because I think I'm teaching a professional practice class right now in the landscape department. and fielding a lot of, we've broken it down to help students sort of define and deepen their own story of self, which is kind of what you asked us to do as part of this Design in 7, these sessions, and kind of having them think a little bit more deeply about what they're bringing to the table, what their strengths are. And as I wanted to just add that as professors, what has felt really rewarding for me this semester is also just making myself available and trying to continue to be an open support system. There's a lot of misconceptions, I think, amongst the students right now about, oh, I'm entry level. A lot of these firms I'm interested in are small. They're probably not looking for somebody like me. And just reaffirming that, being persistent, trying to connect, that relationship building is really important, and that reaching out to your professors or to kind of anybody in the academic community for support is really necessary right now for students. And so I've been trying to make myself available, offer my support as much as I can to help break some of those preconceived notions about how it is in the professional field right now. It's hard to see it because we're all sort of working in a very different way. And I think they feel like it's harder to access it because of that. So yeah, I think that casting a wide net and kind of coming to the table with your passion as a student is really important now more than ever, kind of believing in that and not giving up just because we are where we're at with the pandemic.
And I see there is another question in the chat, but I do want to ask one follow-up for any of the three of you, because all three of you have talked about you wear a lot of hats. You have a lot on your plate every single day. One of the things I tell students is, like, almost certainly wherever you go, that is going to be the case at some point. And you have to find some way to hold on to your spark, like your creativity, the thing that gets you up and out of bed and excited about doing this each day. And so I am curious for each of you, sort of, what are the ways that you found to, like, maintain that creative energy even while all these other kind of responsibilities and aspects of your work have stacked up?
Saying I drink heavily wouldn't be appropriate, probably.
This is a college event, Deb, please.
I'm kidding. No, how about yoga? That's something to ground you.
Yeah.
No, that's a good question. And again, it's every day is something thrown at you. And I think you just have to focus on the bigger picture and focus on kind of the long game. I'm not a sports fanatic. I think that's the right analogy, but I think that it is just really trying to keep your eye on the bigger goals, and it kind of, the ups and downs along the way, sort of, you try to smooth those out because you're focused on where you want to be and where you're trying to get.
Yeah. Maura?
It's been really hard, I would say, over the last year to maintain that spark. I think we started in the beginning with these ideas of daily stretches or weekly stretches where we could kind of focus on ask a big question and have, our staff go out and photograph how people are moving differently, or, just things like that. And it's all was just too much. It's like there's enough we're all managing right now that to try to ask for another kind of way of finding creativity or happiness or curiosity in this time is a lot to ask. And I think for us, it's actually translated, it may not be the healthiest way, but translated back into, again, like digging into our mission as a practice, finding the partners and the work that is meaningful right now in this time of sort of trauma and tragedy. And how do we find the work that is going to make all of this creative energy we have meaningful and have impact? So we've sort of started to really channel that into a deeper dive into understanding where we've gone wrong, how we could do our work better, doing book clubs as an office, reading things we need to be reading, doing soul searching, and pursuing partnerships and work that will make a difference.
That's fabulous. Emily, if you want to jump in, but I also have somebody who wants to ask you a question.
Sure. I mean, we'll just roll it in together. Why not?
Great. So Bethany, you had a question for Emily?
Yeah, hi, thank you. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well. So thank you. Thank you all for presenting. The collection as a whole was fantastic and a lovely way to spend an evening. My question for you, Emily. So I was very inspired by your presentation, and I had heard about the All Square story before. And one thing that kind of I wonder is your story with All Square kind of revolves around this idea of departing from what you have learned. And I know that you have a background in architecture and you understand architecture and design. And the way that you have supported and created this program for people who are formerly incarcerated relies on kind of this design thinking, but essentially a departure from law and from architecture. Do you have any reflections on how architects and designers can support reentering people within our practices?
That is such a great question. One, I would say, and this a little bit for me ties into what was mentioned earlier as far as how do you channel creativity in different ways. And I know it maybe sounds a little mundane, but you know, the gift and the craft of seeing space and understanding space. I was really lucky to go to a school where I learned everything by hand. We folded in the computer at my 5th year, but under, you know, just having that tactile skill is such a gift, and it shows up it can show up not just in physical space, but also in how you lay out a document and how you know, a pitch deck, I would argue, is so important. And one thing I would say is, especially working with so many leaders who are working on launching small businesses and or sort of passive income revenue streams, capturing that vision, capturing what you want to do in a deck or some sort of material it is so powerful if you can tell that narrative through materials and or video. And so lending your expertise and that I would say more than anything, that is so I just think it's such a gift that so many people of many, I mean, including people who are reentering, but so many people who just don't have an architecture background just really could use that expertise. And so I would say that, you know, finding ways to plug in creatively with those who are, especially, you know, folding back into community after being behind these walls that have closed them off for so long. There's a lot of ways to collaboratively lend those skills. I will say I'm a natural conduit in that if you want to get involved in that sort of thing, we've got a whole new fellowship on. And so that's always something, you know, website design is a huge one. But like I said, it can be something as simple as the layout of a document or, you know, where a logo falls on merch. It's just nice to have an extra eye, and especially a trained eye. So, to answer the other question, just quickly, I wanted to say the creativity, I've had to fight really hard for myself to maintain that creative energy that fills me. And right now I'm really lucky to be able to do it through the law firm and that storytelling. But I've committed, it's usually about 1 weekend every 2 months where I kind of detach from the Twin Cities and I find a space to write and work on sort of some of my own creative nonfiction writing, mostly because it's a space where it's something I own completely, right? Working in the space of investing in folks who've been impacted by the system that I haven't been impacted by. I'm constantly, and I should be constantly thinking about where I should be and where I'm totally inappropriate, and whether or not I'm, framing things in a way that's wholly considerate of so many different layers of life. But in my creative world about my life and what I've lived, that's kind of mine. And I get to own that voice in a way that, not that I'm not trying to be not thoughtful, but it's been very filling for me to find that and to really fight for it. And it's super hard. It's really, really hard, but I've been doing it for about 1.5 years and it's been very helpful.
Yeah, that is brilliant. And actually, it kind of helps tie together. I mean, we have a question that I got privately in the chat. Someone is interested in, is in some ways a thread between a few things that we've talked about, which somebody is really wondering for each of you how this plays out as a design process for you all, right? Like we have a lot of folks here who are students or alum of the design school, and we all learn the design process. And I can kind of hear, correct me if I'm wrong, a little bit of like, oh, like a lot of stuff gets put on your plate eventually and you're just trying to keep up and whatnot. And so this person is wondering if you can speak to, is the design process how you actually go about doing some of your work? And if so, how? If not, where does it maybe not always work out the way that you wished it would? How does that actually work in the real world for each of you?
I can start because I think listening to both Deb and Emily's answers resonated for me on this question. And I put in the chat a recommendation for a book, if you're interested, by Kina Lesky. It's called The Storm of Creativity. And she talks a lot about where creativity comes from. And it's something that aligns very much with the way that we work and the way that we see process as something Emily said, unlearning. And Deb also, I think, said this, that we come to the table with an incredible depth of bias based on our lived experiences and how important it is, just echoing this, what you've said for all of us, how important it is to be aware of that, to find a process or a way of practicing that can acknowledge that and begin to undo and unlearn that. And so I think our process is iterative and messy, and is also paired with questions. We question the brief, we question our clients, we question, again, why us? Why are we at the table? Should we be at the table? How do we change if we shouldn't, if there is a conflict here? And I talked a little bit about that for some of the projects I spoke to. How do we make sure we have the right people at the table to do this work in an authentic and appropriate way? So this, I would just highly recommend this book, because she talks a lot about how we as designers can find creativity through acknowledging our bias and unlearning intentionally.
That's great. Deb, you seem very deep in thought. Can you maybe say something about how you think about the design process, if you do, during sort of like a day?
No, I mean, these are really, crazy and unfortunate times in our community, in our world. And, how, you turn on the news or you turn on social and you get brought down and the design process and trying to, again, keep going and asking tough questions. And so, yeah, my mind is going as far as, Bethany, who was just on, asking a question about Emily. I mean, I used to work with her, and she's really good about asking those tough questions and really not being afraid to bring an idea to the table that may not be mainstream or may not be popular, or and to me, that's what the design process is I think, Maura, you talked about that ideation, and I think that in my past roles, in my role today, listening to other points of view and kind of digesting it and really coming to terms with, what do I feel about that idea? How do I interpret that idea? And then how can I expound on it, and how can I learn from it? And I think that, yes, for the creative process, that makes sense, but just in everyday decision making and business and where you're going to spend your time and effort and energy. And I know, I had mentioned that, I work with, when I started, an all male leadership team, and I come with a very different voice. I think since then we've brought about 30% diversity to our board. And, but again, continuing to push the envelope, continuing to say, how can we do better? It's not a destination. And I know that's cliche, but it is that, how do we continue to find ways to improve the process? And that's, I step back from that because when I was in a design role and I was the principal and project manager managing the budget, there's, I always talked about a painting, and a painting, as an artist, you're never finished. There's always more you can do. But for a client, they're only paying you for, they might not be paying you for the Picasso or, so how you get to the best possible end result through that iteration, but in the context of the scope. So that's a lot packed into an answer. So
That is a lot. And I really appreciate that. I'm going to push you to be more provocative here. And so I will preface this by saying I am not someone who has worked full-time like in a design agency or whatnot. My experience sometimes, I'll be honest, like with some of the larger ones, and I think you're kind of alluding to this, Deb, is that they are not necessarily set up for asking hard questions often or having differing points of view. And so I'm curious, as somebody who has tried to push back against that, A, if that's right, if that we don't set it up that way often, and then B, how you start to get it to that place.
Yeah, and I talked a lot about being an advocate for the interior design profession because I do feel like sometimes, again, we get brought in to, do a very narrow scope. And I think that people's experiences and passions are much more beyond that. And I worked with a team of landscape architects in the past too, and I think there's some similarities with, there's some in the built environment. There's a lot of overlap in our professions and how we can add value, and standing up for people's points of view as a leader. I can count on, a dozen times where I've had to sit and justify, how our team can run with this project, or I think we can do this. And it does need somebody to stand up and have a voice and challenge sort of a status quo on how we do things. And, again, we're in a business, but, if we're not pushing to do better and to do differently, we're never going to get beyond. And I do think that we all have an obligation to continue to push, forward on, what we're learning through this process, through these times. And I will say I am trying to open myself up to learn every day on how I can do better, how I can do things differently. And I acknowledge that I'm not perfect. And I also acknowledge that I'm a very fortunate white cis woman that has done fairly well with my career. And the opportunities, even though I had bumps in the road, the opportunities that I've had because of that privilege, is not lost on me. So I see the panel of speakers that we have here, and I think it's wonderful that we have different voices coming to the table to speak about design. But I realize I'm like the white suburban soccer mom voice, so it's definitely it's one voice, right?
So I really thank you so much for that, Deb. And I do want to turn it to Emily and Maura, and maybe I'll just frame it this way quickly, which is I think all of our speakers are incredible. You all are trailblazers, and you have changed things, and you all are obviously wonderful at doing exactly what we're talking about, asking hard questions, changing things. And I'm always curious, like, how do we make that possible part of the system, even when we don't necessarily have, I would say, atypically like brave, smart, brilliant, strong people like the three of you, because we can't, in my opinion, just sort of depend on like that there will always be an Emily Turner or a Maura Rockcastle or a Deb Barnes somewhere. And so how do we start to build a world, a design world that actually, that is the norm, that we are doing that kind of thing, as opposed to that is something that special person does, and that's their unique gift. And so Emily or Maura, I'm curious if either of you think about this.
Yeah, can you hear me? I can never tell.
Yeah, you're great.
You know, and it's hard. You know, pushing those conversations, challenging from within as opposed to detaching and creating something separate from that structure, right? I would say that, you know, at least for me, it was definitely, I spent so much time within legal spaces, some architectural, but mostly legal, that weren't allowing for those conversations and or were actively, I would say, ignoring them. That it was, and I'm so, again, you had mentioned too, I'm similar, right? If had my wife not supported my detaching from that and forfeiting that salary, which is such a gift in and of itself, you know, I couldn't have done this, right? But it definitely, I hit a point, and I think we all have our own internal compass that we have to listen to, but it hit a point of, I don't know that I see, I mean, evolution takes time, and I would say that, but I was there long enough to see that, you know, over the course of 5, 6, 7 years, nothing was changing. As it relates to, you know, as someone who has been so fortunate to start something and with people I love, create something that owns those values and has those conversations, as hard as they are every day. I mean, we've been around 4.5 years and it's still just as hard. I would also say that once you've made those decisions and once you own that, sort of whatever that package is, it's also getting comfortable with owning that and understanding that not everyone's going to be into it, you know. And when you have a forward facing business that depends on people being into it, right, and you're trying to develop a brand, it's also, for me, been really important to get comfortable with just trusting that those who are really aligned and feel good about it will show up, and those who aren't, that's okay. We can't spend our time trying to capture everybody. And so that's been a really hard lesson for me as someone who really loves to bring as many people into a space as possible. It's really hard. It's definitely, it's been, well, someone, I forget which presentation it was, but she had mentioned it's all an iteration. And bringing it back to the design process, which you had mentioned, I look at the 1,800 iterations Allsquare has taken since 2016, and it is at 100% a design process that has unfolded and is still unfolding. And the last thing I'll just add in real quick is the power of the diagram. Sorry, I'm still on that design process question.
That's good.
The power of the diagram is like one of the most important tools I've ever had in my life. And I can't tell you how often I use it every day. And so I think that that's another thing, that there are these threads and tools that come from design and a design background that show up in almost everything. How I plate a meal, you know, it's really incredible. So I think now I'm just not making sense. So I'm gonna.
No, this makes it. Oh, go ahead. I desperately want to see your design diagram for how you plate a meal, but go on.
No, can you still hear me? Gosh.
Yes, absolutely.
It's real though. It's definitely design. It can come into all of it. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that the diagram and how to structure space can spill into so many other areas too, and it's such a helpful tool.
I love that, Emily. I agree with everything you just said. It was great. I think this is something we're struggling. It's a current issue, a horrible issue, and it's all constrained by, you know, we're working within a system, capitalist system. You know, I've got team members who are tired and burnt out. We're trying to do really good work, but we also need to survive. And so finding this balance and understanding when what we're bringing to the table is not, our time is not valued, or we've got to lower our fees. Sometimes I don't know how firms survive if, we're being told to, reduce our fee, or there's no ad services for this. It's really tough, and clients are in a really hard position right now too, especially our public clients. The city, the park board, the counties doing municipal work and funding this work for their communities is extraordinarily hard. And I am on a very particular side of it. So I would love to hear thoughts on other models and other ways. I mean, there's the nonprofit structure, Emily, that I'm sure is one sort of different way of pushing against that and living values in a slightly different way. But it's such a current problem, and I feel like a lot of our equity issues and the kind of the pathways to design education are incredibly limited and privileged in many ways. So, and it's all grounded in this structure that is feeling very constraining and hard to understand how to break down or break out of to be able to work differently. I don't have a good answer.
Well, I think that the lesson here is that we have to iterate probably like a lot of ways of trying to change this and find ones that work well and then double down on them over and over again. We're just about out of time. I did have a question here. Somebody wanted to know if there is anything, whether it's a particular anecdote or story or just takeaway that you didn't have sort of the space or room to get into your 7-minute talk, or maybe it felt like it was pinned on in a way, but you still feel like is valuable, that you'd like to share, just in considering we have just under 7 minutes now together for all three of you in this case. But is there any other last thing that you didn't get in your talk, but you just really like to make sure that you share? Deb?
Yeah, I think one of the articles that I had mentioned to you, Tane, Contract Design Magazine put out an article about a year ago called Does Interior Design Have a Gender Problem? And it was put out by a architect and interior designer from Perkins and Will by the name of Joan Blumenfeld. And it's really interesting how, what I was trying to talk about, I want, articles like that say, out of school, there's women are 90% of interior designers, but then once you get up to the leadership levels, it's less than 30%, even though the pool of design professionals is as at a high level. And so I talked a little bit about how that didn't discourage me, it inspired me to continue to try to find ways to be a leader. And I think it's just something that I hope that by telling my story, I was able to inspire others to find ways to come to the table. And I actually think in Minnesota, we're maybe a little bit of an anomaly, because I look around and I see, so many amazing women leaders, but, in the larger firms and the C-suites and that kind of thing, even from the furniture side, we don't, even though buying decisions are mainly made by women on furniture, but yet, a lot of the manufacturers are led predominantly by men. So I just, to me, I want to see change, and obviously, putting women in there, but also people of color, and having more diversity at boardroom tables. And that's really the piece of my story that I hope was inspiring to emerging design professionals, as well as people that are in sort of the trenches.
Thank you. Laura?
Can't think of anything. I had brought a lot of different potential stories to the table and was excited that the group kind of guiding me through this process, this amazing kind of team, Design 7 support team, helped me hone in on the stories that felt the most powerful and resonated. I was able to talk already this evening about some of the process pieces, the way we work, that I wanted to also share. So I don't have anything else to add that I wasn't able to yet say. I would just echo, I so appreciated the vulnerability in all of the presentations and the stories that were told about people's pathways, and the value of sharing that so people can find themselves and find their path through this is so important. I got a lot out of all of your stories, Emily and Deb and Reggie as well, is still here, and the others. And I think it might have been, well, I forget exactly what, but there's also, I think, a thread throughout them that was sort of an acknowledgement of what we like to do, what we're strong at doing as leaders or business leaders, but also designers. And finding that balance is always really difficult. I don't know, being able to have a community like this grow through a process like this and have colleagues we can talk to about how to navigate that fine line is really beneficial as largely small business owners in the group doing this work. So thank you.
Great. Emily, any sort of last parting pieces that you are still thinking about, or you wish you had 2 extra minutes on your talk for?
Yeah, I'll say quickly. I would say the only thing I would mention is, in my opinion, this is purely my opinion, we only get one set of values. I think this sort of like, I put my professional hat and then I have my personal hat. From my experience, just, whether it's in nonprofit, social enterprise, or in firm presence or in government, that's gotten us into a lot of, I think that's partially gotten us into where we're at is, I believe, corporations, firms, design firms, all angles that, those values have to show up. And when we start separating them and not having them show up in our professional spaces, this world functions and is fueled by the economy and by the market. And so in my opinion, we have to start reflecting, if we have these values as a people, it has to show up in those spaces too, not just on our charity work on the side, and so that's something I would mention that, and it's hard, but I think it's just so important that we encourage each other to, no matter what space we're in, to make sure we're bringing those values through and through.
I love that. That is brilliant and a fabulous takeaway for everybody, because that's absolutely true. And we're getting ready to wrap up here. Somebody did note in the chat that they loved hearing all the stories, and it really helped them to hear the struggles and the missteps combined with the successes. Life is a process. And this is a thing I will just second myself, and I always tell my students. I think sometimes students have the notion that, you're on a panel, you're adults and are out in the world, you must have stuff figured out. And I always want to say, no, absolutely not necessarily. We're all figuring stuff out and being, I would say, confident enough to share the fact that we are all in process and we are all iterating both in our lives and in our work is probably the most important lesson. And how we can do that while holding on to our values is, I think, really the thing that ties all of these amazing talks together. So thank you 3 very much for joining us for this hour. I am going to just say we are going to be back in about an hour at 12:30 with our other 4 panelists from this year's Design in 7. We'll have, again, another hour to ask them questions, specifically what they're thinking about and these same themes and whatnot. So there's a link to join that 12:30 p.m. talk in this. But for right now, one more time, people are already doing it, but give a big round of applause for our 3 wonderful panelists right here, Maura Rockcastle, Emily Turner, and Deb Barnes. Thank you 3 so much. Thank you to the School of Design for putting this together, and we will see you all at 12:30. Okay, great. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tane. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Brian. It was a wonderful privilege to be here. Thank you.